The Chicago Bears are building something real, not building something that looks good on paper in March and falls apart by August. Not building something that gets the fan base excited for 6 weeks of minicamp hype before the reality of a long losing season sets in. Building something real, something sustainable, something that has the fingerprints of genuine organizational intentionality all over it. And if you have been paying attention to what is coming out of Hallis Hall this week during mandatory minicamp, you already know exactly what I am talking about. What is up, everybody? This is Fave coming at you live and completely unfiltered from Favs, the only NFL channel on this platform that covers the Chicago Bears with the depth, the honesty, and the energy that this fan base has been waiting years to have on their side. And today, we are emptying the entire notebook from day one of Bears mandatory minicamp, because there is enough good news in this building right now that I need multiple segments to do it justice. Let us get into all of it. Let us start with the wide receiver room, because this is where the conversation has been the loudest this offseason and where the clarity coming out of minicamp is the most valuable for understanding what Ben Johnson's offense is actually going to look like when the regular season arrives. The wide receiver 3 competition. Who is it going to be? Who has the edge? And what does the coaching staff actually think about the depth behind Luther Burton, Roma Dune, and Colston Loveland? Because that is the conversation that matters, and the answer coming out of day one of minicamp points pretty clearly in one direction. Khalif Raymond. Ben Johnson has been asked about this competition, and while he has been careful to say that jobs are not truly earned until training camp begins, the language he has used when discussing Raymond specifically is not the language of a head coach who is genuinely undecided. Johnson said you would not know Raymond is 31 going on 32. He said Raymond has fresh legs. He said he is hungry, that he is not a gadget guy, that he has elite quickness, and that he is going to be a huge part of what this offense does. That is a head coach telling you, without explicitly telling you that this player has a lane on this roster that the competition is going to have to work extremely hard to close. Fave's personal opinion, the Khalif Raymond signing made complete sense the moment it happened, and it continues to make more sense every single week. When the Bears gave him a deal worth up to $5 million, the immediate reaction from some corners of the fan base was skepticism. Is this really the guy you want as your third receiver? But the people asking that question were missing the context. Raymond is not being asked to be a number 2 receiver who wins at every level of the route tree and carries a game plan on his back. He is being asked to be a reliable, experienced football intelligence slot option who knows this offense from the inside out, because he spent multiple seasons running it in Detroit, under Ben Johnson. The familiarity factor is real, and it is significant. When your quarterback is still in the process of building his own comfort and command within a complex system, having a receiver who already speaks that language fluently, who already knows the concepts, the timing, the spacing principles, the option routes, is worth more than the numbers on the contract suggest. Raymond is not an exciting name. He is a smart, experienced, functionally excellent football player who is going to make this offense operate more cleanly than it would without him. The Raymond and Zavon Thomas dynamic developing in practice is also worth paying attention to, because one of the quieter storylines of this offseason has been Thomas doing enough involuntary work and now in minicamp to put himself in the conversation for real snaps in the regular season. The reports coming out of day one indicate that Thomas took a tunnel screen to the house in team drills. That is not a meaningless rep. That is a player showing the staff that he can make something happen when the ball is in his hands in space, which is exactly the kind of production the Bears need from players outside their top 3 receivers if the depth of this offense is going to hold up through a full 17-game season. Raymond has reportedly taken Thomas under his wing, staying 45 minutes after practice working on the jugs machine together, which tells you something about the culture this offense is building at the receiver position. Veterans investing in the development of younger players is not an accident. That is a tone set from the top, from Johnson, from the quarterback room, from the organizational culture that has been deliberately constructed since this regime took over. Now let us talk about Diallo Adunbi, because this is a feel-good story with real competitive stakes attached to it. And the news coming out of day one of minicamp deserves the kind of recognition that gets overlooked when a team has multiple storylines competing for attention. According to multiple reports from minicamp coverage, Adunbi was back and participating in full team drills on day one. 11-on-11 work, real competitive reps, not a limited participant designation, not watching from the side while his teammates go through team periods. Full team drills. For a player who is working his way back from injury and who has had his availability questioned throughout the offseason program, getting into full team work during mandatory minicamp is a meaningful milestone, and the timing of it matters. Here is the competitive context that makes Adunbi's return specifically important beyond just the individual story. The Bears' pass rush situation entering the season has been one of the primary analytical questions hanging over this roster. Montez Sweat is the established veteran presence on that defensive front, Austin Booker is the young ascending player that this organization has legitimate developmental expectations for. And then behind them, the depth chart has needed contributors who can hold their own in rotation and keep the pass rush functioning at an adequate level when Sweat and Booker need rest or when the game situation demands a fresh set of legs on third down. Adunbi, when healthy and operating at the level the Bears paid him to reach, has the physical profile to be exactly that rotation piece. The contract he received was based on a standard that his production has not yet consistently matched. 1 sack in his last 17 games of football is simply not a number that justifies the investment. But the question of what he can be when he is healthy and motivated and working within a defensive system that puts him in advantageous positions is still open. The minicamp return, 7 months after surgery on a second Achilles tear, is the first concrete evidence that the answer to that question might be better than the pessimists have been projecting. Fave's personal opinion on Adunbi. I want to be completely real about this situation because the fan base deserves honesty and not just optimism. The numbers are what they are. 1 sack in 17 games. That happened. The second Achilles tear happened. The questions about whether he can return to anything resembling the player the Bears thought they were acquiring when they signed him are legitimate, and they have not been fully answered by 1 day of minicamp participation. What has been answered is whether he was going to give himself the chance to compete. The rehab timeline, back in full team drills at right around 7 months from a second Achilles tear at his size, tells you that he attacked the recovery process with genuine urgency. He knows what is at stake. He knows the contract situation. He knows that if the Bears decide to move on from him next offseason, his career in Chicago ends without having delivered what the organization invested in him. That kind of motivation either produces a career year performance or it produces the same result as before. But at least this year, we are going to find out what the version of the Kyler Gordon update coming out of day one is more complicated and more severe.
We need an onside kick, Josh Blackwell!
An Achilles tear suffered on November 7th of last season has now cost him the overwhelming majority of the entire offseason program. Surgery was roughly 7 months ago. The fact that he was not present in any visible capacity during day one, while Adunbi, who suffered his own serious injury, was back in full team drills creates a contrast that the medical timelines and the individual physical situations explain, but that the competitive reality of the situation does not fully excuse. Gordon is a player this defense needs. He is a player this scheme has built meaningful roles around. And every week of offseason work he misses is a week of chemistry, communication, and system familiarity that the rest of the secondary is accumulating without him. The Bears are going to need him healthy and functional for this defense to operate at the level the scheme demands. And right now the timeline for when that happens remains more uncertain than the organization would prefer. Now let us shift to the offensive line, because the Darnell Wright contract situation is one of the most important business decisions this franchise is going to make between now and the start of training camp. And the minicamp reporting around Wright's performance and the coaching staff posture toward him gives us useful information about the direction this is heading. Head coach Ben Johnson stressed Wright's offseason specifically, and the language he used was direct and complimentary, in a way that signals organizational priority. Johnson noted that Wright's approach and professionalism stood out during the spring program. He said Wright continues to get better, described him as a powerful player who can displace defenders off the line of scrimmage, and called the ability to sink into that kind of physical dominance at the tackle position a luxury. That is a head coach building a public case for why a player deserves to be paid. That is language that does not happen by accident. Fave's personal opinion on the Darnell Wright extension. Get it done. Get it done before training camp starts. Get it done before this conversation has to compete with depth chart battles and quarterback development updates and defensive installation noise. Wright has his 5th-year option picked up, which means the Bears have 2 years of control, but locking him in on a long-term extension serves multiple organizational interests simultaneously. It gives Wright the financial security that his performance on the field has earned. It gives the offensive line continuity and stability at a position where continuity matters more than almost anywhere else on the roster. It sends a message to the rest of the locker room that this organization rewards performance and keeps its own. And it structures the cap in a way that, spread across a multi-year window, keeps the overall number manageable relative to what premier offensive tackles are commanding in this market. The projection of something in the range of 4 years and $28 million per year average is in the right neighborhood for what this deal should look like. It makes him among the highest paid tackles in the league on an annual basis, which reflects the market accurately, and it keeps Chicago in a competitive cap position when the extension is structured with the existing contract years factored into the overall financial picture. There is no strategic reason to wait on this. There is no competitive advantage gained by letting this drag into the season. The Bears should make this a priority the moment mandatory minicamp ends. Let us talk about the young wide receivers, because this is the part of the Chicago Bears story that I genuinely believe is the most underappreciated element of what this franchise is building. And the minicamp reporting around Colston Loveland and Luther Burton specifically gives us more evidence that the optimism around these two is grounded in something real, rather than something manufactured. Loveland spoke to the media on day one and was asked about Burton. His response? Calling him the truth and describing him as a guy with the kind of work ethic and mindset you want on your team tells you about the chemistry that exists between these two players and about the culture that is developing in that receiver room. But more important than what Loveland said about Burton is what Johnson has been saying about both of them throughout this offseason program. Because Johnson is not a coach who distributes compliments freely or uses press conference time to make players feel good about themselves when the performance does not justify it. Johnson has noted that Burton is thinking less and playing faster, which for any skill position player is the single most important developmental leap you can make between year one and year two. When a receiver is no longer processing the playbook in real time, when the concepts have become automatic rather than deliberate, that is when the physical talent that got him drafted starts showing up on the field without interference from mental hesitation. Burton has the physical profile that made him a draft pick. The question entering this season was whether the game was going to slow down enough for him to consistently access that profile in live competition. The minicamp reporting suggests the answer is yes. And if that holds through training camp and into the regular season, this offense has a legitimate weapon that opposing defensive coordinators are going to have to scheme around. Loveland's development arc is equally encouraging and in some ways even more significant given the specific role Johnson is building for him in this offense. The reporting indicates that the Bears have been able to expand his route tree this offseason, that the concepts he can execute have grown beyond what the installation allowed for as a rookie. Johnson described him as one of the most consistent players he has ever been around, which is a remarkable statement for a second-year player, and one that Johnson would not make publicly if the practice film did not support it. When you combine the route tree expansion with the physical tools Loveland already showed as a rookie, the ability to line up in multiple spots, the blocking capability in the run game, the contested catch skills, you are building the profile of a receiver who can be used as a chess piece rather than a position player, which is exactly what creative offensive systems need to stay unpredictable at the highest level. Fave's personal opinion on the receiver room as a whole. When you step back and look at what this offense could have at the skill positions, when everything comes together, the ceiling is genuinely exciting. Burton and Loveland as the cornerstones, developing in year two under a coordinator who knows how to build around receivers at every level of their development. Roma Dune healthy and running the route tree that made him a draft pick before the injury issues interrupted his momentum. Khalif Raymond is the experienced floor who knows the system cold and makes everything around him function more smoothly. And then Zavon Thomas is the wild card with enough physical upside that if something clicks, he turns into a genuine contributor rather than a roster number. That is not a fantasy projection. That is what this offense actually looks like if the development curve continues in the direction minicamp suggests it is heading. Johnson has proven that he can build receiver rooms into elite production environments. He did it in Detroit. The pieces he has in Chicago have more raw upside than what he started with there, and he has the advantage this time of designing the system from scratch, rather than inheriting someone else's framework. Let us close by zooming all the way out and talking about what mandatory minicamp as a whole tells us about where this Chicago Bears organization is heading, because individual player updates and contract situations only mean so much in isolation. What matters is the pattern. What matters is whether the information coming out of these practices and these press conferences reflects an organization that is genuinely building something, or an organization that is generating positive headlines while the real construction is falling behind schedule. And everything coming out of Hallis Hall this week points toward the former. The head coach is giving specific substantive assessments of individual players that reflect a coaching staff which is actually watching, evaluating, and developing talent, rather than giving out generic encouragement. The players who were injured are coming back ahead of schedule because they have the motivation and the organizational support to attack their recovery processes with urgency. The young players are developing on the timeline the organization projected when they invested draft capital in them. And the veterans who were brought in to add experience and continuity are doing exactly what they were signed to do, including investing in the players around them after practice hours. This is what a well-run organization looks like from the inside during an off-season program. It does not look like drama. It does not look like tension between the coaching staff and the front office. It does not look like veterans showing up for mandatory minicamp and going through the motions, because they stopped caring about the outcome months ago. It looks like Khalif Raymond staying 45 minutes after practice with Zavon Thomas working on the jugs machine. It looks like Deolo Adunbi rehabbing his second Achilles tear with enough urgency to be in full team drills at 7 months because he knows exactly what is at stake for his career and his legacy with this franchise. It looks like Darnell Wright impressing his head coach with his approach and professionalism, to the point where the organization is prioritizing a long-term contract extension that signals to everyone in that building that performance gets rewarded here. It looks like Colston Loveland and Luther Burton gassing each other up to the media, because the culture in that receiver room is genuinely good and the investment both players have made in their own development is producing results on the practice field that the coaching staff keeps validating. Publicly, the Chicago Bears were not a team that was ready to compete for a Super Bowl last season. They were a team building the foundation, installing the system, evaluating what they had, learning what they needed. And the offseason that followed, the additions they made, the decisions they deferred, the development they prioritized over short-term fixes, tells you that the front office understood what the evaluation process revealed. Now the second phase is underway, the system is installed, the young players have a year of experience inside it. The veterans brought in to complement the core understand their roles. And the head coach is standing in front of microphones at mandatory minicamp, telling you with specific language and specific detail exactly what he sees from the players he is responsible for developing.